not alone in this experience. There's a few little scenes where just kind of subconsciously, you know that this woman is not alone in what she's dealing with as well.
Thank you for joining the Free Time Mastermind Podcast. I'm your host, Robert Gaines. I'm sending out a special thanks to all our subscribers that support the channel. We appreciate you. Today, writer Whitney Popa joins us to discuss her book, A Wave Called Grief. Whitney also shares the creative process behind her writing and her mission to get fellow writers published. So thanks for coming on, Whitney. And also, not only are you a published author, but you're also help other authors as well. And we'll get a little bit into that. But I'd like to first talk about what caused you. Well, when did you first start writing? Let's back up there before you were influenced to write the book itself. Were you writing informally before that?
I have on my business card. So I also own a communications consultancy, a small copywriting agency in the Seattle area. And I have on my business cards telling stories since 1986. So I feel like I was born to tell stories. And I don't remember a time that I wasn't writing. My family is full of librarians and educators and avid readers. So for me, it was always something that I did, just like riding a bike.
And was your medium always pen to page, or were you more voice memos? And I know some people are old school; they'll get the typewriter out. They want to.
Oh yeah, no voice memos really. That's something I've recently gotten into, but I mean, I was a kid that had little diaries. I never kept up with those, but it was more, I just really thrived in writing environments at school. And so, yeah, writing with handwriting, and I still love to send snail mail cards like that. But, yeah, pen to paper. I'm not old enough where I used a typewriter. I could. I remember when we got our first computer, so I'm trying to think of how I wrote for them. I recently before then, I found back when printers had the serrated edges with the little dotted sides. My parents both had jobs where they printed on that type of paper. And so I would write stories and illustrate them myself. And I remember the first one I wrote was with my friend. We had been friends since kindergarten. And it was about hamsters because we had hamsters. So I found that story. My mom randomly drops boxes of things on my porch. Like every husband's worst nightmare is boxes of random things from their wife's family just arriving on the porch. And so she sprinkles them here and there, and they're full of little things like that. My first handwritten story about hamsters from when I was probably 8.
Now, when you're collecting thoughts, is it mostly MS Word? What's the documentation process like?
I keep notebooks all around my house. So my word of the year last year was analog. I wanted to be more analog because even though I'm a writer, I like to infuse pop culture. AI is never going to take that from me. So I always infuse pop culture and fun things that I'm learning about in the world into my writing. And that means that I have a lot of other things that pull at my time and interest that happen to be media related. So long form podcasts, celebrity interviews. I love a super important and or high achieving person. So sometimes I don't even care who it is, if I even like their work, if I admire their work ethic or how their story of how they got to where they are. So I consume a lot of that kind of thing. And I do keep notes on Google Docs sometimes or in my phone, but mostly I write it down in notebooks, which can be a challenge even legal pads. I have lots of legal pads because I'm left-handed, so they don't discriminate against me as much with the bindings. So I find those all around. And I was actually just with my grandfather last weekend. He's 95, and he says he's got at least one Nobel in him, and he was asking me about my book and the publishing stuff. And then he asked me if I would ever publish one of his books. And he's 95. So I've said, of course I would, Papa. And he brought out all these legal pads of half-written stories that he had about a little boy who was a dog sled racer, which is what Papa and my mom used to do together. And his name was Billy. And I wanted to know what happened in Billy's stories. He kept leaving me on all these little cliffs. He had read me at least two. So maybe I get that from him. I just like a notebook, half written things with my hand.
Sure. Sure. I was seeing the book and I was also seeing the screenplay in the movie.
Hmm.
I was because that's such a warm story, you know.
Uh-huh.
People love that. And of course, writing in a professional capacity, not as a creative writer, but as a business writer, you have some background in that as well, where you know you can write although you still have to make business writing persuasive and interesting. You know, I don't know if it's so much going to have, let's say, like the three act structure. Um, but I think, you know, that can be rewarding too, especially if what you're writing from a business standpoint is persuasive, whether it's to bring in customers or to increase the branding of a company. But I'm sure the creative portion of the writing is more satisfying, I would assume.
Yeah, I've always, even when I had corporate jobs, if they would be very sexy to the outside world, like very well-known Fortune 100 companies, and there would always be a little creative part of me that was not completely fulfilled, and so I always had a creative outlet. However, I also, when I'm writing, so I have a degree in English with an emphasis in professional writing, and even when I talk about my work for my clients now, I write articles for the city that I live in is one of my clients, and I write for their tourism website. And even that, because I infuse so much storytelling, not even that, like also those things, I put so much of myself in them that it really is. I've had to get on my Instagram stories, for example, and be like, this is a lot of my soul that's into each one of these. It might seem businessy, but I put so much of myself in them that it really does take it out of me creatively in a good way. But also, I have to take my time with things as much as I can, or if I feel a little overworked, then I'm not as creative because I need to. My muse doesn't just come and hit me automatically. Even for those stories, I get a lot of inspiration as I'm getting ready in the morning. That's why I have a notebook right outside my bathroom so that I can run and write ideas in that notebook instead of being back on my phone and adding to my screen time unnecessarily.
When you do writing, do you try to create an environment that's more conducive to creative development and, you know, getting rid of the distractions? I'm sure as a parent and all that, that's got to be really tough.
Yeah, even for this conversation, I turned on a candle because I like to be in the zone for things, and I have a light next to me and kind of this little altar station. And I had joked with you before we started recording that my husband and I share an office at our house. I usually don't work from here, and I don't work from here when he's here because our jobs and the way that we work is so different. Like he'll come walk past, I'll have incense going, my candles on, I have woo-woo music with no lyrics because I cannot be distracted by any kind of lyrics, and it's just kind of like binaural beats or some kind of alpha wave sort of thing going on to really get me in the zone so that I can pump out really quality work and I have no other distractions around. I had a text pop up just now, which was irritating because I figured out how to turn that all off. So everything's on do not disturb except on the weekends. And so we happen to be recording on a weekend and I'm like, the texts are coming, they can't come. So when I'm working, I don't have email alerts. I don't have any notifications or pop-ups from anything. I'm also the way that I'm talking a little bit is if I had just been born a writer, I might not have these distractions, or if I had just always gone analog, but I'm also a recovering social media manager. So I used to have a ton of notifications and extricating myself from that part of my life. I still have some clients who are grandmothered into certain parts of that. And so I've had to figure out navigating my relationship with notifications and people wanting or needing me and what I choose to, which is why my business started as writing. It was more of a side of writing because I didn't believe that I could do it. I'd always been told by the world and by my family that you need to get a real job. So for me, that was PR, marketing type stuff. And then once I decided that I didn't want to be running everybody else's Instagram for the rest of my life and I wanted to go more long form and I had a degree in it and I could make money, then I pivoted and kept some of that there. But I've had to figure out that relationship to make sure that I create this environment. And before I was full time in writing, I didn't have these little rituals as dialed in because I didn't need to. It was very kind of shiny object syndrome.
Well, when you're writing for yourself, do you have a particular schedule when you're writing just for you, not clients? Is there a special time for that?
I used to write when I was deep in a novel that I've been working on. I'm currently taking a break from it because I've been promoting this other book. But when I was actively writing in that every day, I just woke up earlier and I actually still wake up at that time now and do more meditating and journaling as I'm going through this process of this next phase of my businesses. But that was what I needed, that quiet. My kids they just turned 5 and 7. So that's really the only time. And I'm not a night person. I'm not going to stay up late. I have 2 cats. They're going to wake me up early anyway. So me starting things in the morning and I would devote an hour to something writing related before I would dig into anything else. And I also use Scrivener to write the long form things that I write. So I would just be in that app only and kind of have a similar ritualistic setup to keep me in the zone. And I had to figure out with that too of what does this look like to me? Because the math of doing an hour could sometimes feel like too much, or the word count goals that I would give myself. If you can't tell, I'm a little bit perfectiony. So I would be like, okay, 1,000 words a day, that'll get you to this 60,000 in 60 days. And it's just not always realistic, especially when you're running a business, you have family. And so I had to really think about what does this look like to me? And sometimes it would be reading back what I had written the day before. I would write somewhat intuitively and fill in different sections or work on the outline, just something to make sure that I held myself accountable to that process, even if it ended up being 10 minutes instead of an hour. But setting that hour aside was the important part of my process, not what I did within that or what I was capable of in that moment. And I had to be kind to myself about that as I was going through getting that first draft done.
And do you find those days that you have to drag yourself to the computer? Sometimes once you do that, you can sometimes have a very productive day. Sometimes the ones where you have the most resistance, you actually break through and really get some good work done.
Yeah. The challenge for me right now is I would love it's hard for me to get out of the flows. Once I'm in them, I get really sad when I have to move on. So even with the hour example, cutting myself off if I'm in a flow is tough because I still have to get ready and have my day and take my kids to school. And so the part that is getting easier for me over time as far as writing schedules is I've blocked out Thursdays are my heads down writing days. So I just don't accept meetings. I don't allow anything else to be in my orbit, whether that is a client centric writing day or a writing day for me. Lately, it's been for clients, but it could be for me soon too, as I transition and kind of figure out where I'm putting more of my emphasis in the next several months. And I see summer as being a time when I'm going to be doing more creative writing for myself within those Thursdays too. So then I have a bigger swath where I don't feel as constrained. So like an hour, it's really perception, it could be how long, it could be not enough, and it could be too much depending on the day.
That's right. That's right. Depending on whether the muse is with you or not.
Hmm.
Well, I wanted to get into the actual book itself, which the beginning of that involves a situation with a family member. Can you walk us through how that book got started and the situation that you were in that influenced you to produce the book?
For sure. So my dad was diagnosed with brain cancer at grade 4 glioblastoma when I was 25. And that was completely life altering for me. And over the next 2 years, as he inevitably got closer to death, he told me, never lose your writing. And I had kind of, in so many words, I'm like laughing at myself as I'm going to say this out loud, like written that off as something like, I agreed, but that can look a lot of different ways. So at first, I thought me starting my business when I was pregnant with my first child and could not math my way into paying for childcare and commuting an hour each way and not getting any time off because at the time I didn't qualify for any motherhood leave benefits. I had 6 weeks unpaid. Just didn't make any sense. And so I was like, oh, okay, I'm starting this business. And it has a big writing component to it. It's communications consulting. And so I'm not losing my writing, like, Dad, I'm not going to let you down. But I always wanted to be a writer, like a person who puts books into the world because books are my favorite toy, books and lip gloss. So I just always wanted to do that. And each step I had to give myself permission to do the next thing that I saw other people do and didn't know was available to me. So when he told me that, it was always just lodged in the back of my brain. And I did other things that were writing-ish, but they paid me up front. And doing your own creative projects is a vulnerable thing because you have to invest a lot of yourself and potentially money up front, depending on which route you're going. But even so, like if you're going a traditional publishing route, you still have to invest. If time is money, you're investing a lot of time in coming up with those proposals and reaching out to people and trying to get it in the right hands to get that, marketing spend for you to even produce this thing. And so one day when I was in the midst of this behemoth of a novel that I've been working on for 10 years, that is essentially wish fulfillment of how I wish my time with my dad in my 20s and navigating starting a career and a parent with a deadly disease coming in the middle of that. That's what that novel is about. And as I was moving through finishing that, this little booklet just came into my brain, probably after a shower, where all those great ideas do. And I was actually sitting in this room where we're recording because this is where I do a lot of my morning ritual stuff and getting kind of settled in for the day. And it just was a short little story that came into my brain, and it felt like this is what you need to start with. It felt lighter, not that it's something that's dealing with grief is necessarily light, but it can be when you know that you're not alone in what you're going through. And it's this long extended metaphor about a woman who is dealing with her grief throughout one day. And ultimately, it's about accessing the tools that you have available to you, whether it is just crying and giving yourself permission to do that. You get to make those decisions at the end of it. It's not how I intended my writing career to look like when I was a little girl reading Where the Red Fern Grows and thinking that would be really amazing if I had a book that people could hold in their hands. And I mean that in a super positive sense because there's so many ways that you can get your words into the world. And I am starting on a route where it just feels easier in so many ways for me to put out this really beautiful, artful project that doesn't look like the things that I've held in my hands before and is its own little thing. So, yeah, I'd been working on a novel forever, and I wouldn't say I was blocked in it so much as, again, because so much of it was almost like what my subconscious wanted my life to look like. It was a lot of therapy in writing that. And then this little thing was like, know me first. And so I created that and found an illustrator and a book designer who happens to be the same person. And everything kind of just magically came together for it to exist in the world and to create the umbrella of a publishing arm of my business where I can help other people do that. That's a little bit of a future goal because right now this little book is working hard to afford itself, just like a child.
And of course, we're talking about a wave called grief, just
Yes.
for the audience. And you mentioned Scrivener earlier. I just wanted to interject there that for those that haven't used the tool, it's the only way I can think of it is because I have it as well, and I saw that it really lends itself better to not to my style because I'm nonfiction. I'm very nuts and bolts and more technical, but I could tell it was an amazing tool for writers of fiction, novels in general, because it's like MS Word taken to the end. It's the perfect tool for writers. I mean, I could see you can also get lost in it in a way, and I could see there was a learning curve there, but very powerful tool and affordable. And I think it's one of the
Hmm.
last a program out there that you can actually purchase. In other words, you don't have to
Yeah.
pay subscriptions from now until doomsday. Hopefully they won't change that because that was something I loved about the company is you buy it, you own it. I think you have free updates for life, which
Yep.
speaks to the quality of the company. So I was just very impressed with them. And obviously you've mastered the tool for writing. How long did it take you to uh, get started with Scrivener and then feel like you were versatile with it?
That's been my experience with it. So I've had the license since probably 2016, and it just updates and tells me that it updated, and I never lose anything, thankfully, and it just looks the same. I didn't really have much of a learning curve with it because I was told about it by an author who I just love, who's local to the Seattle area, Lori Frankel. She wrote This Is How It Always Ends, I think is the name of the book, one of my favorite ones. I've read all her books, but that's the one that Reese put on her list of book club picks after I had read it, of course. I have to be hipster about that. But I took one of her classes at this writing place. I don't know what to call it, a writing after college type place in the Capitol Hill neighborhood of Seattle, which is like really well known for its diversity. And at Hugo House is the name of the place. And so I saw that she was teaching a continuing education type class there. And I said, I have to learn from Lori. So she said she used it for her writing process and kind of walked us through it a little bit. And then I bought the license, I don't know, within a couple weeks after her telling me about it so that I could I don't know, Google Docs just didn't, it felt too free. And so I wanted to use something like Scrivener where I could outline on one side and then fill everything in on the other side. And I haven't experienced much of a learning curve at all with it. And I am not a super early adopter techie type person. I just need it to plug in and work.
Now you mentioned the design and illustration, and I believe is it Anna Marie that
Hmm.
helped you with that? And
Yeah.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Anna Marie Salai, I think is how you pronounce her last name. I
And
might be getting that wrong.
how did you meet her?
So I am a big proponent of just synchronicity and magic and things working out the way that they are supposed to. And as these things were coming together for me, as the ideas were percolating, I was hired to speak at a Wedding Professionals Association event. And I was speaking on the topic of adding what I call sparkle to your writing, to your business writings, and specifically your about page on your website. A lot of small business owners, they don't add enough of themselves to their websites because a lot of them are recovering corporate people, as I would like to say. And so they put all these words and ways of talking that they think they should on their website versus what people who are hiring them actually care to learn, and they want to get to know you before they hit that contact button. So I was speaking on that topic, and one of the girls, women who was there, she was at my table. She's a florist. She does the most phenomenal, luxurious, elegant floral installations for weddings. She and I hit it off, and we followed each other on Instagram. And the next couple of days, she shared her branding that she had just had completed by this woman in Colorado, and I clicked on it. I was like, "Oh my gosh, this is so beautiful." And then on her profile, she said that she is a designer for creatives and specifically books, book design and illustration. And I just thought, "Oh my gosh, this is kismet. I am meant to meet this person." I saved her information to come back to, and then I was messaging with the florist about, what's the experience like working with her? I
Oh,
can't
wow.
believe it. I've never seen anything so niche or specific as a book design and illustrator. And she was like, "She's so wonderful. You should definitely work with her." And it was some of the most beautiful branding I had ever seen. And I could tell, all love to Canva. I use it. My assistant uses it for me. We have my brand kit in there. You can do a lot with it, but I could tell that this was very much not a Canva experience. And I didn't want that for what I was creating, because if that were the case, then I could just pay my assistant to do it. But I wanted something very, very artful and thoughtful. So yeah, I met her through this event that was not a great experience for me overall. Like, I did fine as a speaker, but I was just not hosted very well. So I kind of walked out of there feeling like, was all this worth it? And I always tell people this too, like, you think something's going to be a linear thing. Like, I'm going to this event and I might get a few clients out of it. That's a linear extension of what I would show up there to do. But it's not necessarily that. I meet this florist who has a designer for her logo who also happens to be a book designer. And then it leads my life in this whole new direction that was always percolating and meant to be, but not necessarily something that I would have been able to find through a Google search or just asking some friends.
I actually need the cover art, and really, I think at that point I'm finished because I think I'm going to go the KDP Amazon publishing route. Is that what you did with your book, or did you self-publish? That was one part that I had written down to ask you about, and I did research before, but that was one part I left out because I wanted to find out from you directly how you did that as far as the publishing.
My favorite thing that I always joke about with people when I tell stories about it is to, as I like to say, Google things on Reddit, which is completely incorrect. You just go on Reddit and you search or whatever. But for me, I use it like Google, and I just find people there very smart. And so I created a publishing house around this project. So yes, I self-published, and it was published by a publisher, which happens to be me. And so both, I guess you could call it traditional and self, because I don't know. And so when I was wanting to create that arm of my business, I wanted it to be really intentional, really beautiful, and designed by the same girl so that she could touch every part of it and really set the foundation for what this business could become, which is just beautiful stories told excellently and that make you believe in a few forms of art at once. And so it's kind of like going back to that analog part of it, something I want to linger over it. I want to admire the art of the writing and the art of the illustration. So for me, I Googled on Reddit the self-publishing type platforms because I wanted it to, I've been to a few conferences where I'd learned about things. I knew it didn't have to be so hard that I would find this distributor from overseas that would print it for me and all these things. I knew there were things like KDP, but I didn't want to be limited just to Amazon. So I actually printed through Lulu, which seemed to be the best or one of the most favorable options for people. And through Lulu, I set up my book for global distribution so that it would go to all the stores that could want it. And if I were to walk to the bookstore in town and they were to order from their catalog, they could order through their catalog by my ISBN number because Lulu is globally distributing it for me and printing it in the United States, which I appreciated.
And for aspiring writers out there, KDP is I guess the way I would explain it is the publishing ecosystem inside of Amazon. The upside is for fledgling writers, you can get, as long as it's formatted properly, you can get on and up really quick. And then Amazon does the printing on demand fulfillment. They can also do the Kindle version. So it's a really quick way to get started. But with that comes constraints. So you can do it without having the ISBN number you can do it with, but the way that you did it is more free, and you can still sell on Amazon the way that you did it, and you can
Right.
sell in other outlets, whereas in very typical Amazon fashion, when you go with them, you're kind of, that KDP, you're kind of locked in, and I don't think that you can print through any other outlet, so you're basically locked into that. Whereas in your situation, you're not. You can sell on Amazon, you can sell on Barnes and Noble,
Mm-hmm.
you can sell them. You just have a lot more freedom and you have a lot more options. So
Yep.
that naturally, that was a business decision for you. You did the research and you decided that this was a better option because, of course, you're building this company, and doing it this in-house way makes a lot more sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Lulu has its little quirks as well, but overall, I've been really happy with it. And Amazon, it was very quick to get on Amazon once it was approved for global distribution, and most people order on Amazon anyway. Just for me and for information for writers who might be thinking about using Lulu, which I think is a great option when you distribute through. So their customer experience of ordering, when I have on my website, you can order my book from the printer. I have a higher margin on that. I make more money per copy of the book, which supports me and my writing and my art more than the global distribution through Amazon, which and any other company that they distribute to. And everybody has to get their piece of the pie, which I respect and appreciate. And I'm going to get more sales volume wise. Of course, it makes sense to be on Amazon, but like you said, I didn't want to be limited to just Amazon. If I wanted to talk to some indie booksellers as well, that's a part that has a big part of my heart. So as I continue to educate people and bring them into what this book is, and they maybe want to put it on their shelves, I want them to have that option through that global catalog.
And with Lulu, were you able to purchase some advanced copies for yourself so that you could have them on hand and
You have to.
oh,
Yeah.
okay.
That is part of their process. Even when you make a little edit in the book, you have to order another copy of it so that you approve it and then it can be redistributed. So that's a little quirky on their end, but it's also really necessary. I'm not a patient person, so once I'd worked so long on this little baby thing, and I keep telling myself too, like I baked human babies in my body. That takes 10 months. And so this thing took about that amount of time too. And by the end, you're just over it. Like you want to start meeting it and talking about it and getting to know it. And so by then, when I had to keep ordering advanced copies to sign off on, I was like, because the other thing with Lulu too, which we as Americans mostly don't like anymore, is that you have to pay for shipping. So, you have your $3 little book that you have to pay twice as much in shipping to get to your house to then approve. And that cuts into all these things that I had already been paying for. And so I was just like, I'm tired of paying for things. I just want to have it in my hands and not wait 5 days for it to come from Minnesota.
Do you think that with the software, with the printing on demand, with KDP, do you think there's more opportunities for fledgling writers out there, or do you think it is becoming more, is it more exclusive or more inclusive?
I find it's definitely more inclusive. I wouldn't have been able to create this project if it weren't for those types of platforms out there. I just get sad, just like with anything that is good, people abuse it. So I get sad seeing low quality things go out in the world. That doesn't mean that there isn't good information in them, but sometimes I've ordered self-published things that could have used a copy editor. And then as a person who has a lot of experience with words and editing, then I get distracted. If things aren't written well, then I get distracted by wanting to edit them as I'm reading. And that's been a problem for me since I taught the SAT right after college. And I'm all for people getting their work out there. And I hope that they also use those services that can come at a low cost to them of making sure that they proof it appropriately and make it presentable for the world. And for me, I have a high bar of excellence, and that's what I'm working to achieve. And it doesn't have to be the most beautiful thing in the world to make huge waves. But for me, I wanted it to be really beautiful, and I'm not judging other people's work that way on the look necessarily, but the content, I want you to make sure most of the words are spelled right.
Do you have a due date for your larger work project when you think you might have that done?
No, I've already passed the due dates that I had for myself a few times, and well, I read something recently about the the characters needing to trust you to tell their stories, and that really resonated with me, and I feel like getting this smaller project into the world and getting into the summer time frame, and there's a writers conference that I'm going to in Sun Valley, Idaho this year, and a lot of my people that I really admire, like Judy Blume, who became
Oh, wow.
prolific
Yeah,
in her 40s and now has hundreds of millions of books in the world and rides her cruiser bike to her bookstore in the Keys in Florida every day and just has the chillest, in my estimation, life. I watched her documentary too because I study, like I said, I study all these people who I really admire. And I told myself to start studying people who do what you want to do to show yourself. You don't have to buy into the starving artist idea.
that's
These
right.
people are not starving. Especially Judy Blume. Louise Hay is another one. So I just studied their lives and looked at what they did because she created a publishing house around what she did with You Can Heal Your Life and all of the books that now Hay House is this huge phenomenon and supports so many people in so many ways. And those women, I wanted to see women do it too. And so the due date is, I'm allowing it to be when it needs to be. And it will be a nice follow-up to this as well. To your earlier point, I also believe that people who have an innate skill that they have really honed over time and are truly excellent at, like this is their gift. Sometimes we see that non-excellence and that willingness to put out something mediocre, and then we question ourselves and we sit and we tweak and we tinker forever and hinder ourselves in actually getting it out. And I don't want to be that either. I think the inverse of what you said can also be true. And so I've been really pushing myself to get out of my own way as far as perfectionism. And I recently met a developmental editor who I think will be the next step for me once I flesh out a couple sections that I need to finish in that book, because I've also never felt safe with an editor or even met somebody that I thought I could feel safe handing this vulnerable work to. Because, like we talked about earlier, it is so much of me creatively, and I need somebody to really be able to hold that space for it and for me and be kind to my fragile little writer ego as they're going through it and telling me where it can be better and asking me questions.
Is it something where you would pass it off to them and then they would look it over, or is this more of a collaborative project where you would sit together and? work on it?
My understanding is that I would pass it off to her, probably. I don't know her full process yet. I would, I have a friend who is working on a memoir and really blocked, and she had this girl write an outline for her to present to me as like, what would you think as a publisher? Would you accept this as a proposal? And I thought she had written it herself. It was that it sounded that much like her. And the
Oh,
person who is my friend, I also help her with her blog on her company website. So I know her very well in her voice. So I was blown away. And then we recently interviewed her together on our podcast. And I was, I just thought, oh my gosh, my story would be safe with her. So she ghostwrites and she does developmental editing and other things as well. And I think she's really kind of honing in on what she wants to do ultimately. And right now is casting a wide net. And so my understanding is I would probably hand it off to her with notes and some video calls potentially. I don't know her process, but I was excited that I felt safe. My story felt safe with her, and I have I think that's the next step for this in knowing I have a next step for it outside of me finishing writing it. Because then it was like, okay, now what? I go on Fiverr, or Upwork, and find someone. There's a girl whose YouTube videos I like that I follow. But I also had to feel safe with myself. That was a big part of this process for me. And over the past couple of years, I even would say my husband's a great cook, and he and his mom, my mother-in-law, would be just like, they would have an awesome European deli. He's Romanian. And I would just love to come and have them make whatever they're going to make that day. And I was like, man, I can't imagine having a restaurant because the Google reviews, people are just so foul. So, what I've had to work on over the past several years to get to my own next level with this book and putting myself out there to be vulnerable to the world with my art is to feel safe with public criticism, with trolls. Like, there is a benefit to going viral on TikTok a few times and having people, random strangers on the internet, tell you how awful you are. And that, you have this, why are you doing that with your eyes? Why does your nose look like that? You're ugly, you're this or whatever they're gonna say. And that was, so I went through that in order to get to this level of like, all right, cool, I'm going to put my art out here because people are going to say what they're going to say anyway, and I don't care. And I have all these people in my corner ready to take these things with me. So I don't know that everybody thinks about that part of it. Like, if you're blocked, it might not be about the writing, it could be about the sharing of the writing, and then also removing that part of like one step at a time, knowing that the the job is to get it out. And actually my grandma told me, my family's like, they're very hard on each other, and my grandma was like, yeah, I read your book. And I said, oh yeah. And I was just ready for whatever she was gonna say. And after my years on TikTok going viral and having everyone say anything to me, my family can not bother me anymore. She said, yeah, I like stories that are wrapped in a bow. And that's just period, done. That's what she said. And I said, Grandma, that wasn't the point. It's not meant to be wrapped in a bow. So maybe you're not my audience. And it's interesting too, because both of my grandparents who are still alive on my mom's side, they don't even understand the concept of grief. Even Papa was saying to me, I've never really dealt with grief before. He's one of 7 kids, and he has a lot of things in his life that are potentially things that I would see would be instances where he would feel grief, but that's not an emotion that generation really embraced or maybe had a name for. And so for them, they're proud that I did it. They don't get it, and that's okay. And I was a little bit sad for them too, that they said, well, you just don't, what is grief, basically. And, and the whole mental health ecosystem now that's very cool and open and supportive, it's got a good place to support people who are grieving. It's meant to be something that you could give yourself or anybody when you don't know what to do or what to say or what to give, because flowers die too, and cards go in a pile or in the recycling. But if you have this little tool that you can take with you, especially on the days when they're dark, it's literally meant to fit in your back pocket. The size that I selected on Lulu was pocketbook. Those are the specs for it. And I have images of myself putting it in my pocket because I want it to be portable and I want it to be like an opportunity to check in with yourself. And also these tiny little moments throughout it. It's only 42 pages. And it's meant to tell you to check in with yourself and also that you're not alone in this experience. There's a few little scenes where just kind of subconsciously, you know that this woman is not alone in what she's dealing with as well. And it's a pretty on the nose metaphor about waves and riding the waves and surfing so that even kids could really understand it. My son, he just turned 7, and when it arrived, he was so excited. Mama published a book and we read it before bed. He read it to me because he reads for school. He has 20 minutes he has to read every day, and he always reads more because he's smart and special and beautiful, right? And he read it to me, and we talked about it. What is grief? And he completely got it. And he's 7. So
And I love
it's,
anything that destigmatizes, having those feelings. I was in the military, and we were frowned upon even if we went to get medical assistance for
yeah.
physiological, obvious injuries. They were like, you're not going to go, to sick bay, are you? You're not going to. And it's unbelievable. And unfortunately, that also extends to mental health. And I've known a lot of veterans fellow veterans, people I served with that struggled. And thankfully, now that it's being destigmatized, I have friends that are now going to the VA that have combat related, mental trauma, particularly the ones that served in Africa. They saw some really awful things over there. And I worked, it's completely on a different scale, but I worked in an emergency room, ER, OR, a trauma room, burn ward. And, there's some things I wish I could unsee too, but we weren't in war. We were trying to heal these people. So I don't think, the what I got exposed to wasn't on the same level as people on the battlefield. And I wanted to ask you too, if you have a passage from your book, if you have it there, that you'd like to share on camera.
Oh, sure. And thank you for your service. I mean, geez, it's a lot to carry, and I even identify as a tough person. So even these feelings that I would experience, it's like I would cover them. Anger is the easiest thing to cover sadness. And so when I find myself feeling angry, my dad died 12 years ago, and I'll still have moments like Father's Day is coming up. As of this recording, it's just like, it's hard for me. I'm usually crabby. And then I'm like, why am I crabby? And it's because it's Father's Day and I miss him. And I'm allowing myself to say things like that hurt my feelings, or taking care of myself in those ways of identifying my feelings and feeling them versus being tough. And if you can make it to the bathroom, you can make it to school. That's how my grandparents offer or operate. So of course they don't know what grief is. But the passage that I referenced, I'll read that. And as I'm thumbing through this, so it takes the book takes you through a day. It could be any day as you're riding the waves of grief. And I like to say too that grief can look all sorts of different ways. For me, the acute thing that precipitated this project in my subconscious years after my dad passed was this big grief. And I want people to be open to giving themselves permission to grieving what they would maybe deem smaller things, like a friend moved away, or, the loss of a pet is a huge grief. Things like that, changing a job, getting married, you're grieving these different parts of your life, and that's allowed. These are all things worth grieving, or that you will probably have feelings related to grief around. I'm not an expert in grief, but I'm an expert in my own life. And I've had so many things that I've grieved. And so I don't want people to come out like, oh, you have to have had somebody die in your life in order to have felt these feelings. And that's where, so she's going throughout her day, and it's a wave that keeps hitting her, and she's pushing her hand out to resist the wave. And that's not working, obviously, because a hand pushing the wave away is just not going to work when it's a whole wall of water coming against you. And she can't figure out how to get away from this wave of grief. And then in the book, she goes to a surf shop, so I can show that this is one of the illustrations. She's here at the surf shop with these boards, and it says, but then she had an idea. She walked into a surf shop near her home and scanned the wall for the perfect board. That one, she told the shopkeeper, pointing to a white banana-shaped cruiser that shimmered as if it had been dusted with moonstone. A beauty, he nodded, taking it down. While he went to the back to wax the board, she looked around her. She saw others evaluating their options, their eyes wet like hers. From the wave, she wondered? At the cash register, a man with salt and pepper hair and readers signed his receipt. To her right, a young woman with freckles and a golden ponytail, her hand clutched by a little boy with fluffy curls and lights on his shoes, tapped her foot impatiently. On her left, a cowboy lowered his hat to shade his face. So that's the passage that I was referencing earlier, where she's going into the board shop. She's looking for a tool that could help her get through this thing that won't leave her alone. And she sees that others are around her. And it's not so subconscious, like it's obvious that they're all around you. But I know from my experience, I felt so isolated. And that's something that we do to ourselves too, where it's just like, I feel like nobody understands me. Nobody understands what I'm going through, especially in your early 20s when everything is young and fun and you're going out and dating and you have your first job in a big city. At least that's what my life was. And none of my friends around me, none of my roommates understood it. And that's why I wanted a scene like that. She doesn't just go to the surf shop and interact with the shopkeeper. There are other people around who she gets to see also are waiting and don't look like her. And that was really important to me to include. So yeah, thank you for asking me to read that passage.
Thank you for reading it. Any recommendations for our fledgling writers out there? Were there any books that helped you through? Because that was very descriptive, and I could see the imagery. I could see the moonstone. I could see the speckles and the sparkles on the board.
Reading fiction, reading descriptive things is really helpful. I mean, I have a book goal of 52 books a year. I used to be a person who would not read things to learn, like finance books. I always thought, oh, that's boring. Now I have read probably 50 because I'm so down the path of learning about financial literacy and being really confident in running my own finances, especially as somebody who has a couple businesses. And that's, I'm not there yet with like, as somebody who has an English degree and had to take classes like that, I am not seeking out those resources. The Writer's Way is one that's really popular as far as
Absolutely.
getting in that. And I've read a third of that, I think. I read it when my kids were too young. So those like art dates that I had to take myself on weekly, I was like, oh, well, I don't want to let myself down with this. So I need to come back to it. But Rick Rubin, I would say him.
Wow.
That book really inspired me because the way that he talks about you, and it's not necessarily about descriptive writing, but it's about what's coming through you and trusting that and using your writing as a journal. And that like nobody can question the things that you write in your journal. And so how the world receives it isn't up to you. Your job is to get it out. And this, because I am so practiced and because I believe that it was meant to just be told through me, this just came out of me and I edited it a little, tweaked some things that were very nitpicky to me over time, but it came out like in full form. And some projects do.
Now, Whitney, how can people find you the best ways? Is it straight to the website or?
The best place to find me is probably on Instagram. My Instagram handle is at whitpopa. I am at whitpopa pretty much everywhere except on LinkedIn, which I don't do a ton there, but I'm at Whitney Popa there because, it's more professional. And the website that I'm most excited about for my books is ourwestpress.com, OWOUR, ourwestpress.com. It was just launched and it's so beautiful. All of the branding is from Anna, who also illustrated the book, and it will continue to grow and have more books under its arms sooner than later. But right now, the focus is on this one.
Fantastic. And your podcast as well. Where would people find that?
Yeah, we interview local Seattle, mostly female entrepreneurs, so it's pretty niche. And it's called the Coast Podcast. We are sunsetting that podcast after 100 episodes. We are
Wow.
at 90. We just recorded the 93rd
My
episode.
gosh.
Yeah. And so then I'm going to take it under the fold of Our West, and I'm going to interview Western-based storytellers, whether they have books in existence or whether I want to lovingly pester them to consider having books, and just tell stories. So I'm going to rebrand that probably in the fall.
And there's no shortage of talent up there. So you're never going to run out of people to,
For sure.
great storytellers. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate you coming on.
Thank you.
Especially
This
on a
has been
weekend.
incredible. Yeah. And thank you for all the work that you're doing for your service. And I'm really excited to get your book out into the world. I think it's going to help a lot of people. And that if you're thinking about that it could be mediocre, which it's not going to be, then it's good, because they say that about parenting too. Like, only good parents worry and wonder if they're good parents. So you're a good book parent.
Thank you, Whitney. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks, Robert.
Thank you for joining us on the Free Time Mastermind Podcast. I'm your host, Robert Gaines, and we appreciate you stopping in and checking out the channel. If you would, please click like, subscribe, hit the notification button, leave a comment, share the video with someone. We've got some fantastic episodes coming up. Also, too, for today's guest, check out the description to find out more about them, and also look at the links that we've posted below that for ways to get connected with us. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.